per month, $325 per month. It's in my ward. I have to go late and sneak in to Relief Society. No, I'm kidding on that. Totally. See, I shouldn't joke because I'm being filmed. But that also, we also had the discussion in our office today. The other thing that concerns me about these is I have 3 kids who are in the housing market. I would never recommend that they buy into one of these, because if you're stretching to get into a home and you have an extra tax line that can be, by statute right now, it is allowed to be above all of the other lines put together on your taxes, you will price yourself out of a home or out of a condo or whatever it is that is being financed with these. Very, very quickly, because right now there is not a limit set unless it is set by the city, and cities and counties are not understanding that the limit is higher, and they're getting beyond because there's no report back to the state auditor and no checking on the limit. So they're getting bonds before there's any check on whether or not they've gone over the limit. So we have concerns here because we are tasked with oversight, and yet one county who should remain nameless developed a ongoing feud between the county auditor and the county council, because the county council kept saying, why are you collecting tax for these PIDs? And she's like, because that's my job. And they're like, no, it isn't. And it is her job to implement that tax and to collect that revenue and then submit it for payment of that bond. But that's where our problem is. People are not understanding what their responsibilities are with public infrastructure districts, and why we developed this presentation to go out and give, so that cities and counties would understand when you put one of these in, you become responsible for how it operates and for the debt that it carries. So this is now included in, I don't know why, the debt affordability study for 2025. That debt on public infrastructure districts, because it is implemented, understand that that is not debt carried by the entity. That is debt to be paid by the taxpayer. But it is only being paid, that is currently for public infrastructure districts, 4 times the amount that is being carried by the state of Utah in general obligation bonds. That's how high that is now. We have our first project failure. This is why it's going to matter. This is in Coville. Coville had not included Wahale as part of its financial statements since its inception. And they got a letter. The city should have received an auditor alert this week pointing these out, because Coville hadn't reported it as part of their financial statements. And they have to go back and restate their financial statements from 22, 23, and 24 to include Wahale. Wahale is in bankruptcy. What happens when these go into bankruptcy is so by the time the taxpayers, if this sells, the amount of that debt is increasing. Where it matters to Coville, if Coville has a project it needs to do financing for and do a municipal bond for, Wahale's debt now comes into play, because the debt limit is counted as part of your financial responsibilities. All right. I think that's it. Yep, that was it. So I'll open it up for questions at that point, or at this point. I will give this to you. Non-contiguous annexation. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a friendly government now because you have to go back and get their approval. But because you can non-contiguously annex and you can cross city and county boundaries, you don't have to get, you can go to any city or county to get approval. And some don't mind these at all. And there are some counties that do these quite a bit. So, and it can start. So if you started a project in Washington County and it's going really well, and you go back to Washington County and say, hey, I'm your developer doing this great project for you over here. I'm going to expand it now, and I want to do a project in Box Elder County. I just need you to approve it. They all know him. They all love him. He's a great member of their community. Sure. This is why I tell people you are now responsible, because what is yet to be determined is if you build it, remember who approved it, who gets to include it in their financial statements, because physically it's located in another community. So these are moving so quickly that the legal ramifications and the governmental accounting standards are not keeping up. So we have issues that are still in question. And one of those big ones is going to be, how do you handle a foreclosure in your area? If these do not finance in those first 10 years, where does it go? Because I should stop telling my kids not to buy into those, because I have $4 billion in financing for them. If they go bad, what do we do? So there are a lot of ifs out there, and I don't have all of those answers. I'm just telling you the problems that we have seen as their oversight. Okay. Yeah, there are a lot of success stories. Okay, so who crafted it? All of these decisions are done by the legislature creates this policy. So all of these, I don't create the policy. I just get to oversee and be the oversight over the policy. I did not do this. So, and they control it, which is why we've done this presentation for them and pointed out the problems. We have some recommendations for them to how to, where some fixes could be. And I do see some movement in the legislature to rein some of this in. So I imagine that number is going to go up really quickly, because I've said that publicly now as people try to get theirs in. And then success stories. I don't know that we will know for sure on the total success story until the bonds are paid, because the other part of these, nothing in code has them expire. And when you have I've been in local government, and I appreciate everyone in local government, because I'm telling you, you tick off your neighbors, you leave your house early in the morning and you come home really late at night. So it is true service when you're serving in your community, especially on land use, because there is nothing you are ever going to do that is more controversial than land use. Trust me, I've done it. And I audit people, so I can have some pretty good comparisons here. But remember how long these last. We haven't had one actually expire and pay its full bond. And what I do know for sure is we have very large projects. Let me put it this way. Development by its nature is speculative. Projects fail. They fail all the time. When do you know it failed? Because it's typically when the developer can't pay its bills anymore, but the developer doesn't have the bill anymore. The taxpayer does. So that's a good question. And I think one that's yet to be determined. Are there some that are paying their bills just fine? Yep. But I don't think that the public is very aware, because these are new, about that extra tax line. And we have set up all sorts of scenarios in the state auditor's office over how you could actually do these. And I hate to even give a room of strangers all those ideas, because we may create our next Frankenstein this way. But there are holes in how the rules are currently set that you can really exploit this. And that is our concern as the oversight over them. So I hope I answered the question. Okay. Any other questions? I see them in both. And more often than not, they're a mixed use. And then, so you're seeing the same line, but in mixed use projects, who has oversight over who pays what percentage of the expense? Because there is a different advantage given into and different requirements in a commercial development project than there is in a residential. So, but there is no oversight or built into this system over how you, other than the straight tax line, who pays that debt back. So it becomes necessary for the creating entity to create that policy. That this is new, and most of them are going to have Piper Sandler, because Piper Sandler sells most of these, come in and tell them, this is a separate legal entity. You have once you approve it, you have no responsibility for it at all. And that's just factually inaccurate, because Piper Sandler is not a governmental accountant, and they are thinking that they are private. But let me just give you a hint on that one. If you're bonding a municipal bond, pretty sure you are now a component unit of that municipality. And that should be the first clue. So there is a market for these bonds because they pay a higher interest rate, which makes them, and they're municipal bonds. Municipal bonds, by their nature, are supposed to be a higher guarantee of payment because it's backed by a government entity. So a higher return, tax-free, backed by a government entity. There's a market for these. And that market is driving what's happening in the development. If I had concerns, which I obviously do because I've done this presentation now, I would be telling my legislators why I have a concern with that. And I will tell you straight up, I'm going to take off my state auditor hat, which is not unbiased. And I'm going to step over here outside the camera maybe and tell you that as a prior elected official over land use, I do believe that this should be decided by local entities, that local entity control over land use, I think, is paramount because you know your community better than anyone else. But that is my prior county government experience coming through, and I was trained right. So I would be talking to my legislators, which I have, because I have concerns about that non-contiguous annexation. I think that the legislature should change that and change it quickly. I suspect that they will not change that for the super PIDs because those are typically state projects and they like those a lot. So I see those continuing, but on the ones that are approved by counties and cities and that are going into counties and cities, I would be asking for legislative change, and I have. So I hope that answers that. But if it's coming in, the city can set a policy. Right now, the problem with that is it is yet to be legally decided. So then I would look at your attorney to ask whose policy rules? The governing entity where the land use rules are set, or the entity that approved it? Because that has yet to be legally decided. And I'm just an accountant here. I would never claim to be an attorney. I hope that answered the question. I wish I had all of the answers, but I do have all of the problems, just not all of the answers. So. I think it's going to, I think it's going to come down to once that one entity, if they started with a project in another county, it's going to go to the tax commission to impose the tax. That's where I think it's going to go. But currently, it's probably going to be in the county and there's going to be an argument over who has to impose it, because if they only had a quarter acre for where they started it in one county and then they non-contiguously annexed into another county, then it's going to be, but you only have a quarter acre over here. Do you really need to do centrally assessed for that? I see this as an ongoing problem. But right now, probably the most practical is going to be in the county where the biggest part of the project is. This is one of those open-ended questions, because that gets really, really complicated. Who has to report it on their financial statements? So right now, the way it is, they're on the state. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but I audit the state's financial statements, and we are currently in that audit. And it has a statutory deadline, and I am waiting for one of these to send me their documents. And I'm going to be having staff working over Christmas right up till New Year's to try to get it out, because they can't get me their financial statements. So it is a struggle to get them to give you their financials. And that's just from personal experience now, that it's going to get complicated. So welcome to my joy. Absolutely not. So knowing what I know now, it was a difficult vote for me then, because it was, at the time, it was not in my ward boundaries. It is now. But the way it was sold at the time is they had already done this in Colorado, and it was awesome. And I've had long conversations with the Colorado state auditor, who does not have oversight over public infrastructure districts and does not want oversight over public infrastructure districts, because they can see exactly what we're experiencing now. So had I known what I know now, no. But at the time, because we didn't, it was new. It was a great new idea that the legislature came up with that made a economic development project possible within a prior gravel pit that should be the town center. And it was a great idea. We were looking for, I'm in the unincorporated area. We were looking for a tax base so that we could incorporate and have a city center that was great and that we could control and plan. This seemed like a great solution to that problem. But now, remember where I am. I'm in Mountain Green. Everybody will drive past it. If you drive to Snow Basin, you'll see that area. The commercial is not coming out of the ground, because do you know how much more it costs for that commercial property when they can go right across the street and buy a commercial property without that tax line? So the commercial property is not developing within the PID. It's developing across the street in the non-PID area. So there's a disadvantage for the commercial property to locate within the PID, the same way there's a disadvantage to buy a home within a public infrastructure district if you are aware of all of the costs that are involved. So it would have been the 30 years with the 10-year extension on it. They have promised them 25 years, but I think all of that is going to be dependent on how much they've collected to be able to pay it back. Because like I said before, it's like my answer before, success depends on did it actually get fully paid, and did it dissolve at the end? Because the other hole in these is there is nothing in statute for how they dissolve. And if I know anything from sad experience, is that government, once it has a revenue line, does never like to let it go. So, and think of it this way, 25 years on a road, how many of you have had to repave a road in less than 25 years? You will pay for the infrastructure and be replacing the infrastructure before that original debt is paid. So, and the town center it's not It's not there. So are you familiar with, how familiar is everyone with Mountain Green? If you make the corner to go, you can see all the homes have gone in, and now Golden West is the only commercial property that's viable in there. I don't know because I'm not over there anymore. I'm not in charge there anymore because I left in at the end of 2000. So theoretically, I don't know because I don't get to see their financing, and Morgan County has not included it in their financial statements. So that might be why because they don't know that they have to. But the other one, so technically, I would guess that they're not behind, but that's one of the reasons why it's $325 a month for those that are there. In theory, it could. Because I don't know, because remember, the PID board that has that decision is separate from the county. So the developer has that decision still. Yeah. Oh, right. Thank you for being accurate. Yeah. So when they can uncontiguously annex like this, you have to be really good with your GIS mapping. And I have found through sad experience that most of the state is not good at GIS mapping. So it becomes very difficult for the oversight body to then determine what the boundaries are and who you're collecting it from. So it's getting really, really complicated. And then when you have a county that has 25, it gets even more complicated. Are you sure you got the right amount from the right person to then pay that bond? So as these grow, we see that oversight. Did I get it? The oversight becomes even more complicated as they grow. Oh, sorry, 43 in that one county. That has, yeah, it gets complicated really, really quickly. So no, they're 100% developers because they have to be the property owner. And typically it would be a conflict of interest if you voted for a PID that you were in. So I still think in local government, I'm not so sure about state, but I know in local government that is unethical by the rules. So you shouldn't be voting for one that you own. You should be, and you shouldn't be appointing yourself to a board of property that you own. So I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing, but when the public infrastructure district is owned by the developer. Now remember how this goes in development. Typically, property gains value every step along the development process. So it becomes very lucrative for the person who got the approval for the PID to then sell it to somebody else who's doing it. It's then they don't report that back to the city, county, or the state auditor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, who the new board members are. So when we reach out to the city, they have no idea. And so then it's up to us to track it, which is why I find out about it when they're issuing a bond. So sad but true, the way I know how much money they have in bonds is through a third party reporting entity on bonds. I would highly recommend it, but it is still up to the city for the oversight on it to make sure that they understand. And that as those ownerships change, you're not always the first to know. You should be because you have oversight if you're the city or the county, but they don't always tell you. And that's just, we have 54% compliance. And that's with me hiring a full-time employee to go out and track who they are and where they are. And that's with someone full-time. Pardon me? Whoever, so typically, so they, not even before they get to the bond, They'll sell it once it's approved because it's raised in value, and then all the way along the line, anytime that they have a step up in value, you can have another developer step in. So when you have a big project, like let's think Wasatch Peaks Resort, they have a $300 million bond. So if you think back to Big Sky, that's patterned after the not that's the city. It's patterned after Yellowstone Club in Big Sky, Montana. It failed 3 times before that project was successful. But if you issued the $300 million bond to the developer at the beginning, what happens if the project fails? I'm asking because I don't know. And that's the point, is because these are new and we're dealing with a very lucrative financing position for the developer there, it is up to the city and the county to put the boundaries there in their policy and enforce it as much as possible. Because you can set a lower rate, but then you have to be watching them all the way along the part of the project. And like I said, they don't even like to tell you who the board is, and they never report. I have yet to hear a county or city tell me what the project is costing along the way, because they should be reporting to the counties and the cities the cost of that project and how much that they expect to go into that property tax line for their bond. They're not hearing that. The first they're hearing is the bond issuance. I really, really hate that part. I really do. But you're right. And that's my concern, and why I think I got asked to come. Because yeah, that's my concern, is with that non-contiguous annexation, you no longer have control, but you'll probably have responsibility for it, whether you approved it or not, or it's on your financial statements or not. Because if you've got a project within your community that isn't working out, does it help or hurt? This is why I keep doing this Hi, Jim Harvey. No. No, Jim knew I was coming. I told him, so maybe he'll watch. But yeah, I keep saying it out loud. Yeah. Well, what I would say is, from an oversight perspective, I am trying to stay neutral and point out where I think you can put in what guardrails you can. But I do think it is necessary for whoever approves this to understand what they're doing to the communities as well. So that's why we're talking about it. Development by its nature is speculative. And when you're taking this kind of a project on to this and this kind of debt, it is worth taking all of the steps necessary to make sure you are thinking through all the possibilities. And that's why I'm encouraging you to do that, is think it through. Is it a viable project? Because if it wasn't viable, with the developer paying all of the costs, and then you are asking the taxpayer for the next 30 to 40 years to pay it. I did hear that they were suggested that. I wouldn't recommend that one either, because that's leasing. But I can tell you, our local government, you were raised right. So that's where I'm always at on it, is I do believe that this is a local control issue, and it should remain a local control issue. I am an independently elected state auditor for a reason. I don't answer to the governor, and I don't answer to the legislature. I probably will have a really good opponent in the next go around, because I keep saying those two things and I keep pointing these things out. But my job is independent of those two bodies and oversight. So that's why I disagree with the governor, and I do it often. So that's and I am free to say that and pay the cost of that. But anyway, these are all good questions. Any other questions? All right. Well, I am a ray of sunshine everywhere I go, as you can tell. I am really fun at parties. So, so thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate it. I know you had a road coming through that will bring all sorts of fun and joy as well. So I appreciate you being here.